So I was writing a big video on an old Rareware game that is not Banjo-Kazooie, and about halfway through, I realized that the script has a very sad and angry emotional energy behind it, and not gonna lie, it was kinda bumming me out. That's when I learned that Banjo-Kazooie had finally gotten a recompiled PC port. This was very exciting news to me and a much needed change of pace from writing that video about that other Rare game that may or may not be Star Fox Adventures. Stay tuned. Now you may recall that about a year and a half ago, Banjo-Kazooie was fully decompiled, and fast forward to today, the game has now been recompiled. Now if you don't know what decompilations or recompilations are, allow me to explain a little bit. You see, when a developer finishes making a game, writes all the code in the engine to make it tick, they must then compile the game from the coding language in which it was written, usually C in the case of Nintendo 64, into Nintendo 64 assembly language that the N64 can read and understand. This is why you need emulators to play Nintendo 64 games on a PC, because even if you have a ROM, a modern PC cannot understand N64 assembly natively, and because it was so custom built for the hardware, it needs a program to interpret that into something the computer can understand. But just like real-life languages, a lot of nuances can be lost in translation, which seems to be more true of Nintendo 64 emulation specifically than most other emulation scenes. Emulating Nintendo 64 games has always been a bit of an ordeal, and it's pretty rare that things are emulated quite correctly. Recently, I was replaying Majora's Mask on Project 64, and changing one setting in the graphics plugin to fix one issue usually ended up breaking something else. Hell, Nintendo themselves made the games and the hardware, and even they continue to struggle to make good emulators for it. There was an entire saga about Ocarina of Time on the Switch Online service where they completely fucked up the Dark Link room in the Water Temple.
It's time to play Can I Fuck This Up as badly as Nintendo? I started with the obvious stuff like removing the alpha channel from the water texture and changing its levels. Then I noticed that the rock texture used on the side of the room looks very similar to the water on Switch. So I replaced the water texture with it and that did the trick. I fucked it.
And this is for official games, not even to mention things like ROM hacks, which sometimes actually request that you use very specific emulators, ones that can actually translate the effects of the original hardware, that other emulators haven't figured out. That's why you hear a lot about hardware-accurate emulation now. It doesn't matter if your hardware is 7,000 times more powerful than the hardware you're trying to emulate. If it doesn't speak the language, something is going to be different. Furthermore, N64 assembly language is illegible to the average programmer. Only a clinically insane person with some kind of divine ordainment from ROM hack Jesus would be able to decipher and modify it in any meaningful way. Which of course makes modding and ROM hacking, a process that would be complicated even with readable code, even more exhausting. But when something is decomped and recomped such that it can run natively on a PC for instance, suddenly this is no longer an issue. I played a Mario 64 PC port and was pleasantly surprised to discover that the dissolve effect had been preserved. It's a really neat graphical feature that is lost in most emulated versions of the game, and it's great to see it back. And now Banjo-Kazooie has gotten the same treatment. In the case of Banjo-Kazooie specifically, this is a game that has been readily available for quite some time, having been re-released both on Xbox and Nintendo's platforms for a few years now. And that's not even counting emulation. So for people who don't care about emulation inaccuracies, you might be wondering what the point of making a native PC port for Banjo-Kazooie even is. But there are actually a few points. First and foremost, putting any game on PC is generally a net positive, because the experience is infinitely customizable. The Xbox re-releases could play Banjo-Kazooie in HD, but what they couldn't, or rather chose not to do, was make it run at 60 FPS, but now, through the magic of computies, you can play through the entire game at 60, 120, or probably even 240 FPS if you're in the competitive Banjo scene. And you don't even need to do anything special, it just works. And if the HD resolutions don't excite you, there are people playing the game in ultra-wide resolutions, which looks absolutely grotesque. I don't have an ultra-wide monitor, but I can simulate the effect of having one by squishing the game window. Is that wide enough for you? No? Alright, how about now? It's more cinematic this way, you know. It also bears noting that there exists an HD texture pack that makes the 2D assets a lot sharper and more detailed, which, in tandem with the resolution boost, makes for a game that looks very modern without trampling the art direction. One thing I really appreciated is how controller support just works right out of the gate, which I know that's pretty common now, but it's not something I take for granted anymore because I've played games that cost actual money that don't understand what a controller is. On top of this, the game now supports some kind of analog camera feature mapped to the right stick. This is a pretty neat feature considering the original game only allowed you to move it by 45 degrees at a time. Also, this isn't that important, but the game also has rumble support, which I feel I should mention because even on games that were originally designed for PC, this thing never rumbles and I still don't know why. Probably my favorite change though is the ability to save every note you collect. In the original game, all notes would be taken from you when you exit the level or die, which made dying to some bullshit an absolutely devastating prospect. There's an argument to be made that it makes the game challenging in a good way, but that's a hard sell when you get whacked by a fan in the engine room. In the Xbox Live Arcade version, they added a feature to permanently remove notes from the world, and the PC port wisely brings that feature back as an option. This is great for anybody who doesn't want to put up with that nonsense. Speaking of collectibles, if there's one thing I'd like them to add to this game, it would be the removal of the draw distance issues. Even though you can see level geometry from halfway across the galaxy, the game despawns faraway objects, foliage, certain set pieces, and most importantly, collectibles. I assume to save on the precious system resources of the 1996 hardware. This is not merely a complaint about graphics though, it also has a gameplay effect. Despawning faraway collectibles is a problem in Banjo-Kazooie because the game is built around collectibles. If you're trying to find something like notes or jiggies, you can't just stand on a vantage point and expect to see it in the distance somewhere because the game won't render it if it's too far away. For a guy like me who has played Banjo-Kazooie to hell and back, this isn't a problem because I know where everything is already, and if you're watching this, there's a good chance that applies to you as well. But put yourself in the shoes of somebody who hasn't. They might end up running in circles trying to find a stupid little thing for a long time, which could completely fuck the pacing of an otherwise brisk and exciting adventure. Having the ability to see where everything is without it despawning from a distance could solve this potential stumbling block. I don't know how practical it is to do this, but I can't imagine it would be beyond the capabilities of a modern PC. As a matter of fact, the Xbox 360 version of the game was able to do it, so I imagine it could be a feature in a future release. From what I understand, the game is still being updated on and off, so if this isn't on the radar yet, I hope they can put a big pin in it because it would be a great leap towards making this a truly definitive experience. In its current state, however, Banjo-Kazooie Recompiled is very exciting. Playing this game for the millionth time, now with a fresh coat of paint, was a lot of fun, and if nothing else, you can think of this as a perfect excuse to play through Banjo-Kazooie again. And if you've already played enough Banjo-Kazooie and you're not feeling like touching it for the rest of your life, the game still has you covered because it actually comes with mod support. That's right, in addition to the high-definition asset pack, some ROM hacks have been modified to run on the Recomp. Currently, Jiggies of Time and Nostalgia 64 are both supported, so if you haven't played those already, this is the perfect opportunity because with the power of the PC port, you can now get the best first impression possible. I covered both of these games in the past, with the latter being part of my Christmas ROM hack and fan game marathon, and while I could go over these hacks again, I think it would be kind of redundant at this time, other than to say that they were already great when I was playing them on Project 64, and revisiting them in full 4K with 60 FPS support, high-resolution assets with rumble and analog camera, not to mention the ability to take notes off of the world, all of that is very exciting. I'm particularly enjoying Jiggies of Time because most of the footage I gathered for that hack for my initial review was destroyed when I accidentally formatted one of my system drives when trying to fix a broken Windows install. It's a long story. Silver lining, I now have an excuse to play through the game again in all its 60 FPS glory. And if even after all of this you're still not sold on the Recomp, then at the very least keep an eye on it because it's probably going to get even better as time goes on. Who knows, maybe they can bring back Stop and Swap and make it work with Sea of Thieves or something.